Welcome back, everybody. This is Mark Hateman, president of Curie Solutions. I've got Amira Armond, our founder, here with me, and today we're going to talk about a CMMC POA&M. A little tricky, some very specific things you need to know when thinking about a POA&M for your CMMC. And so I'm going to hand the mic over to Amira, and she's going to give you some specifics.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. All right. So let me share my screen. So there's a lot going on when it comes to CMMC and the plan of actions and milestones, whether or not you qualify for it, what is a successful certification, what isn't. And and this is probably the least understood area because the DoD made it incredibly complex. I'm going to try and explain it today. So we've got a lot going on here. First off, let's talk about what is a plan of action and milestones. So in the olden days, a plan of action and milestones meant something that you wanted to do to improve your environment, improve your system. That could be patching a web server that for some reason, you're having trouble patching it. It could be even upgrading equipment to a higher level just because you want to improve stuff. Or it could be that you are failing a security requirement and that you need to fix that security requirement. In the olden days, it could have been all three of those. But with the CMMC program, the government has changed the meaning of the term for us. And now what a plan of action and milestones means is that you are failing a security requirement. Okay, it is now consolidated to that one thing. You are not doing something that you contractually said that you would do.
And that's specific to CMMC.
Right.
Okay.
So with CMMC, the DoD has created a new term called operational plan of action, which accounts for those other things. You want to improve your security by replacing or upgrading a system. You need to fix a temporary deficiency, right? So that's now a new term, operational plan of action, because the DoD has claimed the regular plan of action milestones to mean you are not doing a contractual requirement. Okay, operational plans of action, they're cool. They're fine. You can have them. You can have lots of stuff on them, and it's not a big deal. But it is a very big deal if you have a plan of action milestones, because that means that you are failing a requirement. Look on my screen, we got these red things, right? So that means that you are not in compliance with the DFARS 7012 clause or the FAR 52-204-21 clause for level 1. And that's a big thing. Okay, so when you have a plan of action and milestones or an operational plan of action, the expectation for documentation is the same, but you want to have different lists for each of them. Basically, you're expected to write down what the problem is, whether it affects a security requirement, say 3.1.15, what you're going to do to fix it, and when you're going to have it fixed. And that's the bare minimum. You can also add in who's responsible, some interim steps, maybe resourcing considerations. Those are all good to add in, but you can have a little bit less as the bare minimum. Now, for CMMC level 1 self-assessments, this is an important thing to go through, right? So a CMMC level 1 looks like this area on the left here. There's 15 different requirements. They're from FAR 52-204-21. Okay. And according to the CMMC rule that was published in the Federal Register, in order for a company to post a CMMC level 1 self-assessment, they have to be doing all 15 correctly. They have to have implemented all 15 requirements correctly. Okay, so let me find that real fast. Hold on. This is the actual FAR regulation. Okay, so here we have in the blue, for a level 1 self-assessment, a POA&M is not permitted at any time for level 1 self-assessments. You cannot report a level 1 self-assessment at all if you have one or more requirements not implemented in your level 1 scope.
So basically, when you do a level 1 self-assessment, you are attesting to the fact that they are all in place in meeting the requirements.
Right. Even though it's a self-assessment.
Well, yes, correct.
But that's the crazy thing, because like I've talked to so many people about CMMC and they hear self-assessment and they're like, oh, great, I cannot do some stuff.
Yeah.
Right. There's leeway. It's okay. And that's the exact opposite. You don't have any leeway. You have to do all of them. And when you go into the government website to report your score, which is the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS, it doesn't give you an option to say, oh, I'm doing some of them, right? It doesn't give you an option to put in your 14 out of 15 or 12 out of 15. It's just, are you doing all of them? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And that's your attestation. Okay. So in here, if we got one of these things marked red, no matter what the point value is, no matter what the importance is, you cannot do level 1. Right? You just can't get credit for it. You cannot qualify for a level 1 contract. Okay, so you have to turn this green and then do another self-assessment and then report that you are fully in compliance. Okay. All right, let's talk about level 2. So with level 2, you have 2 potential options for assessment. You can do a self-assessment, or you could have a C3PO assessment. And the rules are very much the same for the self-assessment at level 2 versus the C3PO assessment. So both the self and the C3PO give you the potential to have a conditional assessment entered with a plan of action milestones. And that conditional assessment is good for 6 months, 180 days. After which, if you cannot get to perfect, then you are ineligible for contracts. You can't put in a real certification. You can't extend that interim or conditional assessment. Okay,
you'll have to go back and be reassessed. If you will lose your conditional, you don't gain an actual, and you'll have to go back through the whole assessment process and get all your controls reassessed.
Right. And even if even if you get this down to just like a 1 pointer left, right, which is eligible to be POA&M'd, to be clear, you can't wait for 6 months and get reassessed and still have that open and get another 6 months.
Right.
It's not allowed. You only get one conditional or interim certification per system. That's it. Okay. And that also applies for the self-assessment. So if you're self-assessing once and you say, I have a POA&M, I have one not met, you can't extend it. you have to get to perfect within 6 months. So let's go look at that real fast. Hold on. All right, so for POA&M closeout, right, for conditional level 2, you can get a conditional level 2 C3 PAO assessment, which is, generally what would be required to start a contract. If you have your stuff in a POA&M and the POA&M meets all the requirements, and we'll get into that, okay? POA&M closeout, the OSC must remediate any not met requirements, must undergo a POA&M closeout certification assessment from a C3 PAO, and the C3 PAO must post compliance results into EMAS, which is the C3 PAO's database that we post results into, within 180 days of the initial assessment. If the POA&M is not successfully closed out within the 180-day time frame, the conditional level 2 will expire. If the conditional level 2 expires within the period of performance of a contract, standard contractual remedies will apply. You will be found not in compliance with your contract. Right? They could give you a poor review. They could apply penalties. They could cancel the contract. Who knows, right? And the OSC will be ineligible for additional awards that have a requirement for a CMMC status of level 2 C3 PAO or higher requirement. Okay, so you won't be able to get option years. You won't be able to get new contracts if your conditional expires. All right, now, okay, let's practice this. Okay, so there's several conditions that make you either eligible or ineligible for a POA&M. The first condition that makes you ineligible for a POA&M is if any of your level 1 controls, any of the requirements that map to level 1 over here are not met. Okay. So in this list, 3.1.20, which is the control and limit connections to external systems requirement, that's a level 1 requirement. It's I think it's this guy over here. It's either 3 or 4. Okay. So this one right here is a level 1 requirement. You are simply not allowed to get a conditional certification or a final certification if any of your level 1 requirements are not met.
Which of course makes sense when when you read the rule and it says that you specifically cannot POA&M any level 1. That right. It would apply as you came over to level 2. They're going to be off limits as far as POA&M'able.
Right. So if this is not met at the time of your level 2 self-assessment or at the time of your C3 PO assessment, you cannot get certified. Okay. Now, you do have a time period where you can fix stuff frantically after a C3 PO assessment. You get 10 business days. Okay, so let me go find that real fast. Hold on. Is it up here? Nope. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, security requirement evaluation. So during that initial C3PO assessment, where they assess your entire information system, they assess all the requirements. If you have a not met requirement, any of them, any requirement, okay? So it doesn't matter whether they're level 1, it doesn't matter what severity they are, okay? Any of them can be reevaluated during the course of the level 2 certification assessment by a C3PAO and for 10 business days following the active assessment period, right? So if you've got a week-long assessment planned and on Monday, the assessor goes, this is not good, right? 3.1.20 is not good. And you fix it because maybe it was a documentation error. You fix it on Wednesday. That can be reevaluated on Wednesday during the middle of the assessment, as long as your C3PAO agrees. Okay, now it's very important that if you have change management procedure, configuration control, policies, procedures, right, that you follow all those things to control your changes to the environment. It's very important to talk to your lead assessor and confirm that they're willing to reassess if you make a change in the middle of the assessment. They might not be willing to. They might say you have to wait until we're done. Okay, so talk that through.
Yeah, and you can see here that it lists some specific conditions that are really what your assessor is going to use to determine whether or not the requested change is within the confines of the assessment.
Absolutely. So here's some things that that the assessor needs to verify before they basically let you fix a thing. Okay. You have to provide new evidence showing that you fixed the problem. That could mean that you submit a new version of your system security plan if you updated your wording, or a new version of a policy if you fix the wording. Or it could mean that the assessor needs to come back and inspect something or interview people or test it to verify that it is fixed. This one, if you've got a requirement that is supposed to be physically inspected, by an on-site, this can be potentially troublesome, because if you fix it after the assessment team has left your premises, they're going to have to fly back potentially, which is very expensive. So good news is hopefully they are willing and you are able to fix those physical things while they're still there. But make sure you talk it through. Cannot change or limit the effectiveness of other requirements that have been scored met. So an example of that is maybe you missed a requirement that has to do with, say, a cloud system that you're using, right? We can't verify that the cloud system has antivirus running on or something like that, right? And the way you solve it is you switch to a brand new cloud system. Well, if you switch to a brand new cloud system, we're not going to just assess that one antivirus thing against the new system. We're going to make sure that all the requirements that apply to that new system are being performed, right? We have to make sure that it's just as secure as it should be. And so potentially, so according to this, right, we should not be able to assess that new cloud system because it changes the effectiveness. Well, okay. So depending on how you read this, I think there's some wiggle room, which I personally like wiggle room, because I want to be able to get through assessments and pass clients, ideally, right? So what this is saying is, if you migrate to a new cloud system, and that new cloud system isn't doing, right? It changes the effectiveness of a different requirement, or it limits the effectiveness of a different requirement. That's bad. So that means that, to my interpretation, lead assessor is capable of saying, yeah, I'm going to reassess all the stuff on that new system, right? And as long as everything's good still against all the requirements that apply to it, we're good. But if, you fix the antivirus, but instead you break the VPN, right? Well, we got a big issue. We're not going to be able to reassess and mark that thing met. And then the third requirement is the CMMC assessment findings report has not been delivered. So basically, after the C3PO does an assessment, they're going to go back home, work internally for a while, review their results, and then create an assessment findings report. And that's like the final status of the assessment. At that point, when that report has been delivered, if it says that you have a not met, that's pretty final, right? We have to go into that POA&M period or no certification. But good news is we do have that 10 business days that we can do before delivering the report. Now, what do we do if we have a POA&M, right? So you had your chance to fix stuff. You try to frantically fix stuff, and you still have a requirement not met. But good news, it's allowed to be POA&M'd. Okay, it meets the requirements to be a POA&M item. You can have a conditional certification. Let's see, the OSC must remediate any not met requirements, must undergo a POA&M closeout certification assessment from a C3PO, and the C3PO must post compliance results into EMAS within 180 days. Okay, so a POA&M closeout is a small assessment. It's not an assessment of the entire system. It's not a reassessment of all the requirements. It's just an assessment of the stuff that's not met.
And quick question of clarification, going back a second. If through that 10 days, is there a number that you have to have through that 10 days to be able to POA&M? I know there's certain things, and you're probably going to get to this, that can't be on a POA&M. They list specific controls, but do you everybody's after that 110. Everybody hears about the 88 as a number that is kind of the low end. Can you talk to that a second?
So during the assessment and during those 10 days, you could have everything read, and you could fix all of those everything within that 10 days, and it's okay. Now, your assessors are not going to be happy with you if you try and pull that, because I can guarantee you, have not planned to double assess everything during that assessment period, right? So that's a conversation that you should have with your C3PAO when you're actually purchasing the assessment during that sales process, of saying, hey, what happens if I miss a lot of requirements? How much is it going to cost me to get reassessed? And generally, they should have a good answer for it, right? So for us, for Curie Solutions, we include 4 hours of reassessment just as part of the assessment, right? And that generally lets a company get several requirements reassessed with no additional fee, because reassessing a requirement is often a 20-minute process. It's not a big deal. But if we need to travel out to the site again, right, that's going to have to be on the client's dime, and that's something that you should discuss and understand. I would be very cautious with C3PAOs that don't tell you how they're going to handle that. Or they say, oh, well, we'll bill you $400 an hour or something for any reassessment, because unfortunately that can actually incent, well, I don't, so be cautious. I have heard of clients getting surprised by being marked down on a lot of things, and then the C3PO is very happy to reassess them and fix it, but then their bill goes up by 50%, right? So just make sure you know what happens. It's totally reasonable that a C3PO will get paid for additional effort that wasn't planned initially, right? And it's totally reasonable to give you the everything's good cost and then a separate, hey, we have to do a lot of extra work to fix stuff cost. But it should not be a surprise, and they shouldn't be making money on marking you not met, right? That should not be an incentive to them. Okay. So there is specific stuff that is allowed to be POA&M'd, right? So remember, during the assessment for 10 business days, you can fix anything, right? But after that point, you either need to have everything fixed, and then you get a perfect 110, you get your certification assessment from the C3PAO, or a self assessment that's perfect and it lasts for 3 years. Or you are going to have a conditional self-assessment or a conditional C3PO assessment, which will last for 6 months and then expire, right? And after that, you need to be perfect. Or you will get no certification, which would make you ineligible to win contracts, and would mean that you are also, contractually not right if you have current contracts that require certification.
And what's the point level that gets you from what that gets you on a POA&M?
So
Tricky question.
It is a tricky question.
But people want to know.
Right.
Yeah.
So so there's like 5 different calculations you have to take, and they all have to pass. Okay. So one of the calculations is no more than 20% of the requirements can be not met. There's 110 requirements total, which means that you have to pass 88 requirements.
Which is the number you hear thrown around all the time by people is really the only criteria, right? Well, if I can get an 88.
Right. And that's why, like, you can see some rage in my eyes, because it's such it is such a misunderstood thing. And the DoD is talking about that 88 or the 80% as though they're helping contractors, right? But no. That's, look, if you can manage to fail 22 requirements and they're all eligible to be POA&M'd, I'm gonna like buy you a beer, because it is so hard to not trigger one of the other conditions, and we'll go through that. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first condition that makes a requirement ineligible for POA&M, like I said, is if it's a level 1 requirement, right? If it matches one of these level 1 requirements. And that's in level 2, that's 17 out of the 110 are just plain ineligible. Okay, it doesn't matter what point value they are. That includes one-pointers like 3.1.20. Okay. The next thing is there's a scoring matrix where all of the level 2 requirements have a score or a value of 1, 3, or 5. And that point value is based on if you're not doing it, are you already hacked? Are you probably going to get hacked? Or are you probably still okay? Right? So a 5-pointer is, dude, you just connected a computer directly to the internet with no firewall. What is wrong with you? You have already been hacked. That's a 5-pointer. A 3-pointer is, this is bad. This is not great. But maybe you'll get away with it for a while. And that's stuff like not having multi-factor authentication turned on across the entire environment, but you've got it in some places, right? And then a 1-pointer is, it's a good thing to do, but probably not going to immediately cause you to fail, which may be, I think, setting your computer a lock after failed attempts is a 1-pointer, for example, okay? So we're going to go for each of these items. We're going to go to the rule and we're going to look up the point value of the requirement. Okay. So down at the bottom of the rule, it talks about scoring. In the CMMC level 2 scoring methodology, each security requirement has a value 1, 3, or 5. And it's related to the designation by NIST as basic or derived security requirements. Okay, so high level and fundamental security requirements versus supporting requirements, right? So the 5-pointers are security requirements that, if not implemented, could lead to significant exploitation of the network or exfiltration of CUI. And these include these 2 lists here. Okay, so we're going to go look up 3.1.15, and we're going to see if 3.1.15 is on the list. So I do not see it here, and I don't see it here. Okay, now we're going to look for 3.4.1. Let's see, 3.4. Oh, okay, so 3.4.1 is a 5-pointer, right? So you cannot get a POA&M with 3.4.1 not met. You're just going to fail.
You've got 10 days to get it, basically.
You got your 10 days. The end of the assessment in 10 days, or else it's time to get a whole new assessment. Okay. All right, and then so that would be it, right? No POA&M allowed, no conditional assessment allowed. Now, what about 3.1.15? Is it a 3-pointer? Right. So here's the list of 3-pointers. I don't see 3.1.15. I don't see 3.1.15. Okay. So we could, if 3.1.15 was the only thing not met, which if I go look it up, that's this one, right? Authorized remote execution of privileged commands and remote access to security relevant information. So essentially, if in this example, the client failed to identify which privileged commands are authorized for remote execution. That assessment objective would be other than satisfied. This would be marked other than satisfied, right? That can, just a little tiny documentation flaw can result in an entire requirement being failed, right? Good news, pretty easy to fix, hopefully, right?
Yep.
So at that point, if this was the only thing that was failed and you were not able to fix it in that 10 business days, then you would be given a conditional level 2 self-assessment or a C3PO assessment. You then get 180 days to fix it and schedule another assessment. And the C3PO, if it's a third-party assessment, would come back in and they just check this one thing, right? What was not met? And they'd only check that. They wouldn't check anything else. They hopefully mark it met, and you get a full certification assessment backdated to the original assessment. Okay, so it would last, say, 2.5 years instead of 3 years. If you did not fix it in that 6 months, then your conditional certification would expire, standard contractual remedies would apply, you would not be eligible to win new contracts that require CMMC level 2. Okay. All right, now we also have a couple other things that we need to check before we can accept a fix. Okay, so let me go find those real fast. Have it here? Nope. We'll just cut this part out. Okay. So for the POA&M, right, we're going to start evaluating. All right, so right here, this is where it talks about the assessment score divided by its whole number of requirements is greater than or equal to 0.8. Okay, so essentially, only the 1-pointers can be failed, with the exception of FIPS encryption, which we'll talk about if I remember. And so you need to have more than 88 requirements met. None of the security requirements included in the POA&M have a point value greater than 1, except for 3.1311, which is the CUI encryption, which may be included on a POA&M if encryption is employed, but is not FIPS validated. Okay, so here's the one exception. If you're using encryption to protect CUI everywhere, but you can't show that every single one is FIPS validated, you are eligible for a POA&M for 6 months on that one. That's the one exception to the 1-point rule. Okay. Number 3 is listing off the level 1 requirements that are 1-pointers. Right, so the level 1 requirements that are not 1-pointers would, be naturally included in the other ones. It also lists off 3.12.4 system security plan. So this is an interesting one, the system security plan. There's a statement in the rule that says if the system security plan, which I think is 3.12.4 over here, if the system security plan is not up to date, right? If you do not provide your assessors an updated, up-to-date system security plan that's accurate for your environment, the assessment cannot even be scored. Okay, we can't give you any score Nope, definitely no POA&M, right? But nothing, right? But the rule also says that if any part of this 3.12.4 is not met, this is also a full failure, okay? And this is relevant because there's a lot of assessment objectives in 3.12.4, and some of them are kind of silly, okay? So for example, the frequency to update the system security plan is defined. If you have not defined how often you're going to update it, it is updated. You've got it updated, but you haven't actually defined somewhere how often you're going to update it, then that's not met. And that's not POA&M'able. Okay.
Although likely 10-dayable.
Yes, it is 10-dayable. And then we do need to verify that, when you made those fixes, that you don't change or create a not met in a different security requirement,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that you do have new evidence showing that you corrected them. Okay. Let's see. That might be it. Yeah. So, any last for you, Mark?
Just, this is probably about a 45-minute video. So, clearly this can be complicated, but if you rely on the information in the rule and cross yourself back and forth to the what's allowed to POA&M, what's not, it you can see that, in my opinion, really the by far the best way to go about this is to go into that assessment with confidence that you've got everything met, and that you are not going to POA&M anything. I would not recommend heading into the actual assessment knowing that you have POA&M'able items, which could be a strategy that some people may consider using. But when you look at the specificity of what controls are POA&M'able, what can be fixed in the 10 days, there's a lot of risk in taking that approach, a lot of risk of missing even an opportunity to be conditionally certified.
That is a great tip. So when I've looked at this, approximately half of the requirements are 3 or 5 pointers.
Yeah.
Right. And they're spread out throughout here. And you'd be surprised. Some of the requirements, which are like documentation based, are 5 pointers. You'd think that they're not that important,
Right.
but they are. And if you hit any of those 3 or 5 pointers, with the exception of the FIPS encryption requirement, that's not POA&M'able.
Yeah.
So absolutely don't. Yeah, just like Mark said, definitely double, reinforce that. Don't plan on getting a POA&M. Right? That's a real bad idea. It's very dangerous. Try to come in perfect, and then scramble at the last minute if you need to.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you,
All
Mark.
right. Well, thank you, Amira. And as we say at the end of every video, and everybody does at the end of every video, like, subscribe. We will be providing regular content. And I would ask too, if there's something you'd like us to cover, put it in the comments, and we'll track that and put something together for you. So thank you. Have a good rest of your day.